And welcome everyone to our Extension Hot Topics August edition. We are very glad that you all are joining us today. Extension Hot Topics, as you know, this is a program where we try to highlight different professionals in the Purdue Extension world. We've had some great topics in the past. Today we are talking about potential toxicity found in pastures. We are very glad to have Elysia Rodgers from DeKalb County speak with us on this. As always, if you folks don't mind muting yourselves so that we can get through this program. Elysia, are you okay if questions come up in the chat? If Courtney or I, we might just interrupt you. We'll do our best to get good timing on that. But
Yep.
throw your questions out there. We may have some
Mhm.
time at the end. Otherwise, thanks everyone for joining us. And Elysia, the time is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. Welcome everybody. I'm Elysia Rodgers, the Ag and Natural Resource Educator over in DeKalb County with Purdue Extension. I've been with Purdue for going on be 16 years in about a month. So I've been with them for a while. It doesn't feel like it, but it's been great. So today I've been asked to kind of talk about potential toxicity found in pastures, and I will be doing my talk based on the toxic plant garden that has been developed down at the Southern Indiana Purdue Ag Center. So I'm going to pop that link into the chat box. So all the information that I'll be giving today can be found here. So if you want to go back and review it later or save it for identifying purposes later on, you have it available. So another great resource before we get started that we can utilize is the Purdue Forage Field Guide. Backwards in your screen, but the Forage Field Guide, it's on its 4th edition now, and it's a great pocket guide to have with you as you're going out and identifying things in your pasture, hay fields, things like that. So without any further ado, we will go ahead and get started. So when we look at our livestock, we have to kind of consider what their preference is when we eat, when we're considering whether they're going to prefer to eat primarily grass. Are they going to prefer browse, which would be our shrubs and trees? Are they going to prefer broadleaf plants, things like that? So this is a diagram that was put up by, not Ohio, Oklahoma State. There we go, the other OSU university a few years ago. And I thought it was great, just kind of explaining and showing details as to where some of our livestock prefer to eat. So our cattle are definitely more of those grazers. They have low selectivity, so they'll eat everything from the top to the bottom of the plant. They like the flatlands, things like that. Versus our sheep, they're about 50% grass and then a pretty good mix of broadleaves versus trees and shrubs. And they're okay with a little bit higher elevation. And then we have our goats. It's primarily what I raise at home. And they are known for being browsers. They prefer to have those shrubs and those trees, and then grass followed by broadleaves. So having an understanding of what our livestock diets are, really kind of helps give us an idea of what they may be attracted to if they need to eat weeds or if they're forced to eat weeds in our pastures or in the hay. So these are all of the toxic plants that are found in the toxic plant garden down at the Southern Indiana Purdue Ag Center. So these are all what we will review today. And we will go in alphabetical order just because that's how my mind likes things. So we'll start off with Alsike clover. So there are several different types of clover out there. Alsike is the primary one that can cause issues with our livestock. It is a perennial, so that means it comes back year after year, found in moist areas all the way down to poorly drained areas. So it likes kind of the damper soils. That's where it kind of prefers. Throughout the grazing season is when we can see concerns of that, and all of the green vegetation can be of concern. Basic issues with Alsike clover that we see are, especially in horses. Let me back up a minute. So on these slides, when we get to a new type of plant, on the right-hand side, you'll see different animal icons. So those are the animals that are known to have issues with these plants. So as we go along, those animals will change depending on who has problems with the plants. So there's a little explanation there. So clinical signs, and when we're looking at Alsike clover toxic issues, would be photosensitization. So basically sunburns, especially if you have on horses, if you have white areas, especially along the faces, you'll see sunburn will occur a whole lot more often. Up to liver disease. So things like drooling, diarrhea, loss of appetite, jaundice. Um, so research has not really found how much needs to be consumed before an animal starts to show signs. Um, Primarily in horses is where Alsike clover has an issue. They would probably be the biggest livestock affected by it, but then we have the cattle, sheep, and swine that can have a little sensitivity to it as well. So this is what our Alsike clover looks like if you haven't really taken a close look at clovers before. Typically has that white flower on it, not really pinkish or purplish like some of our others. Does not have a watermark on the leaves like our red clovers will do. They have like a watermark that comes up in a V shape. And then you can see at the base of the plant how all the stems kind of come together and clump. So that's an easy way to help identify our Alsike clover. Next plant is an on Alsike clover as well. Go back a slide. The toxins are found in both fresh tissue and hay tissue. So if you're feeding horses, you want to be careful that you're not feeding a predominantly clover hay, that there is a good mix of grass in with it. So that way, in case there are some issues with the Alsike clover toxins, it gets diluted by the grass. So next up is our black cherry. So this one's not one you really think about until there may be issues. So black cherry is our tree. It is a perennial, found a lot of times in the edge of our forests, our woods, things like that. So maybe along our fence lines. And the biggest time of concern is when the leaves are wilted. So if we have storms that come through and branches happen to break off or leaves happen to blow into the pasture, once those leaves become crinkly potato chips, that's when we start to have the issue. That's when those toxic compounds are the most potent in those leaves. So we need to be aware. We need to make sure we have our trees identified along our fence lines and then within our pastures and hayfields to make sure if there are cherry trees, we're keeping track of those and trying to keep those leaves cleaned up if we can and not accessible to our livestock. So with black cherry, if there's been some toxic poisoning, you'll see slobbering, increased respiration, convulsions, pupil dilation. So it only takes, I'm going to get ahead of myself here. There we go. It doesn't take a whole lot for those toxic signs to start to show. So really it's from some cyanogenic glycosides are the main toxic compound. And like we said, the leaves are the biggest accumulator of those glycosides. So for cattle, anywhere from about 1.25 to less than 5 pounds of leaves need to be consumed. Now that's quite a few leaves if you get to thinking about it, how much a dry leaf weighs. But if the pasture happens to be clipped down close, if it's been overgrazed, things like that, and this is the only green material out there, they could consume it. For sheep or goats, you're looking at anywhere from about 0.2 of a pound up to 0.75 of a pound. So again, not really a lot of material when we're looking at our small ruminants that they have to consume. So when we look at black cherry trees themselves, they do have these distinct shaped leaves that have the serrated edges along the outside of them. They've got the white flowers in the spring, the small wild cherries that develop throughout the summer. So this is what our black cherry tree will look like. Next up is the buttercup. So this is actually a winter annual that we get. It's not a perennial. So it starts growing in late fall and then will pop back up in the spring. but doesn't really like the warm temperatures during the summer. Um, Again, primarily found in those pastures, fields, moist woods. So if you have pastures or hay fields that run through woods or the edge of woods, this is where we need to watch out for buttercup to develop. Spring to early summer is when it's the biggest concern. That's when the toxins are most concentrated in the plant. And all parts of our plant are toxic as well. So with buttercup, just about all of our species are affected by consuming this. So we have blisters and ulcers that can develop, a lot of salivation or drooling, convulsions, depression, excitement, anorexia. All of those are different signs that maybe some buttercup was consumed. But they have to consume what they call relatively large amounts before toxicosis actually occurs. So relatively large amounts could be anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds. So they've got to eat quite a lot of this before we really start to see some of those toxic compounds come about. So this is what buttercup looks like. So we have everywhere from the flowering stage with the delicate little yellow flowers. The rosette is on our top right. And then the lower picture is just as it's starting to develop the seed head. So that's after the petals have come out. So a little bit lower growing plant. So this would be more delightful, I guess you could say, to our cattle. Because again, our cattle were more of those grazers. They like that low ground better. So our next plant is the Carolina horse nettle. And so this is one, again, that's a perennial. So with it being horse nettle, nettle always makes me think of spiky things. And that's what we see. So find this find this plant. There we go. In waste areas, pastures, fields, roadsides, several different locations. Mostly late summer is our biggest concern because Carolina horse nettle is a part of the same family, nightshade family. There we go. So we get the nightshade berries on it and things like that. So that's some of our toxic issues. So the leaves, stems, green berries, all of them can have issues. So if you notice, horse nettle is the first one where we have a clinical sign of death. So obviously the black cherries, the other ones, Alsite clover, things like that can lead to death if the toxins get potent enough. But Carolina horse nettle is the first one that can definitely cause death if a lot is consumed. And we can see that pasture and then silage especially can be issues with it. So again, because it is a part of that nightshade family, the biggest toxic issue with it is the solanine concentrations. So that's typical for our nightshade families. For a mature horse, they only need 1 pound of material to have clinical issues start to show. In sheep, really, we're looking at only about 225 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So for toxic effects, so if we're looking at a 100-pound lamb, we're looking at 2.25 grams. Not a lot of material that needs to be eaten with this Carolina horse nettle. And so about 3.6 ounces for a 1,000-pound cow. Not a lot needs to be consumed before we start to see issues with this one. So for lethal effects, we're looking at 500 milligrams per kilogram of body weight on the sheep. And then 8.2 ounces for a 1,000-pound cow. So it doesn't take a lot of the Carolina horse nettle to cause really bad effects. So this is what the Carolina horse nettle looks like. Not my favorite plant. When we first moved into our house, we set up a garden on about a half an acre. And so obviously disturbing that soil and things like that. By the end of, I think, about our 3rd year gardening in that location, I started to get a lot of Carolina horse nettle that started to come through. Not a fun plant to try to pull and try to weed because of those spines, because of those prickers. they go through a lot of materials. Ended up having to use leather gloves. And even then, if I caught one of those spikes on one of the seams of my glove, it came through. So I'm not sure why animals would want to eat this plant fresh, unless it's the only green thing growing out there, because it's really not pleasant when you get it on your hands. And if you think of trying to wrap your tongue around that stem with all of those spines on it, it's just not a pleasant thought. But if animals are hungry enough, they may try to eat it. Um, but like I said, the biggest issue is if this is found in some of our silage fields, hay fields, and it's chopped. Because at that point, the pieces get small enough that they can't sort it out as easily from the hay fields. So there's a closer look at the fantastic spines that this one has. Next up is cocklebur. So again, we have our little animals here on the right-hand side that indicate what animals have issues with it. Cocklebur is actually an annual, but because it has so many burrs that come on it, it reseeds itself fairly easily. Found in a lot of locations, floodplains, wastelands, overgrazed pastures, roadsides. So really it's the young plants or the really mature plants when we have issues with the toxins. So basically gastrointestinal pain, anorexia, breathing issues, blindness in cattle can be caused by eating if they've eaten cocklebur, and it could potentially lead to death eventually. So I am not going to try to pronounce the toxin, but it's a sulfated glycoside. So it has glycose issues, so it's kind of that sugar issues. And so those are what are found in high concentrations in the seed and then the cotyledons, so the very young plants. Really, it only takes about 0.75% of the animal's body weight of the young seedlings to have those clinical signs appear. If it's not caught or treated, we could see death in 1 to 2 days. So in a cow, they need to eat about 7.5 pounds of just this material to have issues. But again, if that pasture is overgrazed and it's the only green thing growing, that's kind of where we see these situations. For the seeds themselves, so if we have a really mature plant and we have just those seed heads on there and the animal's going along grazing the top of those seed heads, only needs 3 pounds to have major issues in a 1,000-pound cow. So young plants, while they're still toxic, not quite as toxic as those seeds themselves. So this is what our cocklebur looks like. So we have kind of the leaves, long. So that's kind of what the early plant looks like when it would be most toxic. So long, red, elongated cotyledons, kind of red color just as they're starting to come out of the ground. Mature stems will have kind of spotted the spots here along the stem that you can see on the lower picture there. Kind of looks like a little bit like poison hemlock, but not nearly the same purple blotchiness that purple hemlock has. The leaves will be rough, kind of that triangular shape once it gets more mature. And then obviously the seeds are kind of just these lovely burr shapes. So next up is our common milkweed. So while this is definitely a beneficial plant for our monarchs and things like that, it really doesn't have a great place in our pastures and hay fields because it is toxic to our animals. So it can be. So it is a perennial, so it comes back year after year. As we all know, right now we've got my milkweed at home that is in my pollinator garden. Has lovely pods starting to develop and form on it. So I know within the next few weeks, I'll probably have milkweed pods all over the place. So I will probably end up harvesting or knocking down most of the milkweed before those pods explode everywhere and get into our pastures. So time of concern is when the plant's green or if it gets chopped up and dried down in the hay. So the stems, leaves, and roots are issues with this plant. Luckily, it doesn't really cause death, or it's not, it takes a lot and a long time of them eating it for it to cause death. But we may see some irregular pulse, maybe a little bit of vomiting, some diarrhea, trouble breathing, loss of coordination a little bit if they consume quite a bit of this milkweed. So there are several compounds that can cause issues with the milkweed. So the galatoxin, which is found in that white sap that maybe we as humans can also be a little bit allergic to because it's kind of like a latexy sap. So we need to be cautious if you have a allergy to latex to handling these plants as well. Make sure you wear proper personal protective equipment if you're handling these, if you do have a latex allergy. There are also several glycoside compounds in here. Again, we've talked about this in several of our other plants, and it also contains alkaloids. So it contains quite a few different toxins, compounds that can cause issues in our animals. So in terms of the amount that needs to be eaten, cattle can graze low amounts of milkweed with no effect. So if we're out there in our pasture and the hay field and there's maybe only 1 or 2 plants that have popped up, I wouldn't be too concerned. But again, when you think about those pods that form after pollination, there's a lot of seeds in those pods that then disperse with the wind, like a dandelion poof will. So we need to be cautious when we get to that stage that while it's still beneficial for our pollinators, we really don't want it to spread in our pastures if we can help it. So toxic dose is about the same as a lethal dose. So if they get up to consuming so much of it, it could lead to death as well. Could be as little as 2% of the animal's body weight, which would be about 20 pounds in a 1,000-pound cow. But you think about it, again, eating 20 pounds of material is a lot of material. For a cow on a normal basis, they need about 22 to 25% of their body weight consumed in forage material a day. So, nope, I lied about that. Yeah, that'd be right. So it can make up about 10% of what they really need to consume a day, but it's still a lot of material that they are just focusing on. Again, biggest issue we see with these plants is if that pasture is overgrazed. So as long as you have good green material out there for them, you have good hay available for them if you have kind of a overgrazed situation. Just making sure they have other materials to eat than maybe what's just green and growing out there in the pasture. Nice thing about this is once we do get into true fall, not false fall like we'll have next week, but true fall, once we start getting those true frosts, those tend to decrease our toxicity of this plant. So many of you know this is what milkweed looks like. Has those kind of oval shaped leaves. We've got the massive milk pods, the flower on top. It gets kind of a purplyish white shade. Can get fairly tall, about 2-3 foot or so, is about the tallest they will get. But again, when you break that stem or those leaves, you get that milky white sap that occurs. So,
Alicia, when I was talking with some folks, we had to make sure there's a difference between pasture and prairie. So that native prairie, okay, good milkweed. Pasture, not so much. So just be careful of your neighbors because a lot of folks are putting in these great pollinator gardens.
Mhm.
Just be aware, just a heads up if you have farmers around, not to be putting stuff that's going to overseed into that pasture area.
Yep, correct. Yep. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. So like I would certainly support pollinator gardens and things like that without a problem. But like I said, we have to be cautious about how that plant spreads. Yep, hay producers hate milkweed as well. Definitely takes away from that quality of those forages with that sap in there and things like that. So we want to try to be conscientious if we are planting for pollinator gardens that we try to limit how much that milkweed is in there and how much of it will spread. So we try to be good neighbors. All right, our next plant that we have up here is crestleaf groundsel. This is kind of a fun one to say. With a name like groundsel, it is one of those low growing forages that our grazers prefer. So our cattle or horses, and then the small ruminants will eat it as well if there's not a lot of other green material growing. Winter annual again, so it starts to grow in the fall, will come back up in the spring, and then doesn't really like those warm temperatures throughout the summer. Found in quite a few places, so things like no-till crops can have it. Our hayfields and pastures, anywhere with moist soils. So a lot of different locations. So again, because it is in winter annual, it's one of those first things that come up and is green in the spring. And so that's when it has the most concern. All of it is considered toxic or has toxic properties to it. So we can have, again, that photosensitization that's seen, that sunburn on those white areas, diarrhea, anorexia, depression, aimless walking. So it's kind of like some of us, if we walk into a room and forget why we walked in there and we just walk around trying to figure it out, that would be kind of that aimless walking. And then the liver failure is the biggest issue with crestleaf groundsel. So these are the compounds that are most concerned. Again, I'm not going to try to pronounce this today. On a good day, I might be able to, but we're not going to try it today. But it's an alkaloid, and that's what causes our chronic liver damage. And that's a specific compound. So in cattle, they need to eat about 4 to 8% of their body weight of just that green plant over a few days. So it doesn't have to be all at once. So if you go out there and it's early spring and you see green out there and you're thinking, great, I can turn the cattle out there or the horses or whatever. And you turn them out there for a few hours to get them acclimated to the green, bring them back in, turn them back out for a little longer the next day. If they're eating that 4 to 8% over the course of a few days, that's when we can start to see issues. But again, that's going to have to be 40 to 80 pounds of material consumed over a few days of just that material. That's a lot that they're going to have to consume. So as long as there's other good green stuff growing out there, they should not have as many issues. It's when we don't have that other material out there that this is about the only thing growing. That's when we see those toxic issues. So this is what the crestleaf groundsel looks like. So in the spring, we'll see more like this top right photo. Looks almost like a leafy spinach or a lettuce to me is what it looks like. And then it will send out these little stems, and that's where these yellow flowers will be found. And so starts growing laterally, so it starts spreading out in the spring. And those stems that we have the flowers on will actually be hollow and they won't have any hairs on them. So that's another way you can break it open, and if it's hollow, you'll have crestleaf groundsel. So Dallas grass is our next one. And so this is actually a perennial, but it's primarily a warm season grass. And so for those of us that are up north, this is not a plant that we really have to worry a whole lot about, just because our warm season grasses don't like it so much up here in the north. So, but found in several different locations. Late summer, the seed heads are where we have the biggest issues. And for a summer like this, when it has been fantastically humid, we get the ergot fungus on it. Same as what you'll get on corn. So that's your corn smut, and same as what you'll get on wheat and such as well that can cause issues. So the seeds are really the biggest issue when we're looking at Dallas grass. Can cause that diarrhea, inability to stand. If you have a favorite pet animal and all of a sudden they're not quite sure about you, could be a clinical sign. And then what they have called is the Dallas grass staggers. Sounds like it should be a dance move, but it's not. Really, it's uncontrolled twitching, sudden movements. If they're easily spooked, kind of act drunk, that's what the Dallas grass staggers are. And so again, the compound that causes these issues found in those seeds is that ergot fungus that we see here. Produces toxins, and alkaloids. So those have got the paspalinin and alkaloid toxins are the biggest issues because of that ergot fungus. So if there's more than about 6% alkaloids in that diet, that's where we start to see issues. So it takes quite a few pounds to be consumed to get those specific alkaloids in there. Really for the paspalinin, it shows about 0.13 ounces for a 1,000-pound cow. But again, that's just consuming those seed heads, just those seeds. So you're looking at a tenth of a, no, not even tenth of a pound, 0.13 ounces. So not even a full ounce for a 1,000-pound cow. The other alkaloid is about 0.2 ounces. So they've just looked at studies in mice and translated that into cattle weight, but they haven't really looked at it in small ruminants yet. So, but again, this is one of those warm season grasses. So those of us that are farther north, not as much of an issue. And so this is what that Dallas grass looks like. It has a really nice wide leaf blade to it. It's not thin like some of our Timothy or orchard grass. And then the seed head is very distinct as well. It almost looks like a caterpillar coming off that stem. So this is what our Dallas grass looks like. Let's see, spreads by rhizomes, but grows in a clump. So it's kind of contradictory. So it spreads underneath the ground, but grows in little clumps here and there. So next plant is the Eastern Black Nightshade. Again, one of those nightshade families has those toxic alkaloids to it. A summer annual, so it'll start coming up in the spring and then thrives in the heat. Found in several different areas, and biggest issue is going to be the fruits on this one. Toxins can be found in the leaves, but the green fruits, those little green berries, are going to be the biggest issues with the black nightshade. So you can see the clinical signs here. If your animal develops kind of that sitting dog position, that's not normal. That may definitely be a good sign of black nightshade poisoning. So toroidal glycoalkaloid solanine. So again, that solanine is particular to the nightshade family, and that's what really causes those toxic issues. And so we need about 0.1 to 1% of the animal's body weight consumed. Again, that's a lot of those little berries being consumed to really cause issues. And so this is what the Eastern Black Nightshade looks like. We've got our little rosettes here at the bottom. Very distinct leaf shape on them. Can reach about 2 foot in height. And then the young leaves, if you look on the underside of them, have this purple shade to them. So as little seedlings, this is a pretty good indicator that you have nightshade growing. And then we have our common berries that we see. Start out as green and then go to this dark purple color. Our next plant is the hemp dogbane. And so this is a perennial as well. Throughout the growing season, it can cause issues. And so hemp dogbane, pretty toxic, causes pulse issues, dilated pupils, vomiting, death, and quite a few of our livestock. So the biggest issue with this one is it's a cardiac glycoside. So when you think of that cardiac, it attacks the heart. So that's why we see that rapid pulse, those convulsions, the vomiting. And so these compounds go after the heart. I guess it'd be over here, the heart. So really, cow only needs to consume about 2.3 ounces to have some toxic effects. Have up to as little as 1/2 ounce of green leaves. So in the spring, when they're good and concentrated with this glycoside, it's caused some death in cattle. So we really need to be cautious of this hemp dogbane. And so this is what it looks like. It kind of gets to be almost a shrubby appearance because it can get 2 to 6 foot tall. Has a woody stem on it, and then opposite leaves. So on each node, as we go up the plant, there'll be little bumps that are nodes, and coming off that will be a leaf on each side. Has a smooth leaf edge. Flowers are arranged in kind of those clusters that we see here with those white little, almost looks like teardrops on them. And it does actually have a milky sap as well, similar to some of our milkweed, and spreads by underground rhizomes. But you can see here, this is what it looks like. Again, it's one of those woody stems. So our sheep and especially our goats may prefer eating this over our cattle. And so you can see it develops these long seed pods as well. Almost looks like an elongated okra if it gets to be that mature before it's caught. Our next plant is Jimson weed. This is again an annual, so it comes back each year if it's reseeded. Otherwise, it does not come back. Likes kind of those waste areas, wood lines, fertile bare soils. So if you've had a field that's been fallow for a couple of years and you decide to just turn animals out there to kind of help trim it down, Jimson weed may be one of those weeds that's popped up out there. So the seeds are the most toxic part of this plant, but the green material is as well. But seeds are the most toxic. So we have a whole bunch of different signs that can come with digesting Jimson weed. Everywhere from diarrhea, weight loss, increased thirst, tremors, hypothermia, nausea. So a lot of kind of, lost my word, nervous system type issues. So a couple of, too far. A couple of main compounds that have concerns with our Jimson weed. So the hyoscyamine. It's based on an atropine compound. And then L-hyoscine, which is a type of ether. So it has issues with kind of the oxygen, binding with the oxygen in the body. So pigs are probably the most sensitive to that seed consumption. Again, those seeds are where the most toxins are found. So it really does not take much. So you see there for a 200-pound hog, you're looking at 7/1000th of an ounce. That's not very many seeds being consumed of Jimson weed to cause issues. On a 1,000-pound cow, you're looking at 0.6 to 0.9 pounds. Again, not a lot of material to consume to have issues with Jimson weed. And so this is what Jimson weed looks like. It's kind of gets a little bit taller, up to about 5 foot tall. If it gets out of control, has these very distinct serrated, lobed, just kind of toothy looking leaves. The flowers are tubular, so you get like this, and then it's white, purpley colored. And then our fruit is probably one of the most distinctive things. So it's all these spikies. They aren't harsh like our horse nettle was, but if you don't handle it right, you could get stabbed a little bit, but it's more of a fleshy stab instead of a needle-like stab. So this is our Jimson weed, and so this is what we kind of have to watch out for, again, because those seeds are the most toxic. But if you imagine an animal trying to get in that seed pod with it being as spiky as it is, they've got to be pretty hungry to have to get into that. So next up is our Johnson grass. So again, it's a perennial warm season. Again, more of an issue down south in southern Indiana and south from there. But it's found in the fence rows, pastures, roadsides, ditch banks, anywhere grass can grow, this can grow. So a couple of different times of concern for the different types of toxins found in Johnson grass. So we have hydrogen cyanide is one of the compounds. And when we have a young plant is basically when it's most toxic, less than 24 inches tall, or after a hard frost in the fall. Just like some of our other regular forages, frost can send out some toxins. So we need to be cautious if we're grazing or making hay right after a hard frost. And then the nitrate toxicity or the nitrate poisoning is during a drought, or if you've gone out and applied a lot of nitrogen, things like that. So that's where the nitrate toxicity comes in, is when there's a huge influx of nitrogen concentrate or nitrate concentrate in that plant. And that's usually accumulated in the lower stem. So if you're in a drought season, but you still have to go out and just get a cutting of hay off, if you know you have Johnson grass in that field, you may consider putting your cutter bar height maybe another inch, inch and a half higher than what you normally do. Just because, again, that concentration is in that lower stem, you'll reduce the amount of nitrates in that upper part of the plant. So you can see all the issues that can come here. This one actually has some blood issues with it. So it changes the color of the blood. Depending on if it's bright cherry red, it'd be the hydrogen cyanide that's affecting it, that compound. Or if it's a chocolate brown, it would be the nitrate side of it. So that's kind of a good indicator for a vet to tell what's going on or which toxin to treat for, depending on what color that blood is. So hydrogen cyanide is also called prussic acid, if that's more common for you to listen to or know. So we have that prussic acid poisoning that we need to watch out for, similar to some of our Sudan grass and things like that. So we can see here how much needs to be consumed for clinical signs or up to death. So for the prussic acid or that hydrogen cyanide, horses are less susceptible because they don't have a rumen, because that prussic acid kind of gets caught in that rumen and kind of gets stuck there. So that's why our cattle and small ruminants are more affected than horses. Nitrate toxicity, basically have your forages tested. If there's more than 1% nitrate or 5,000 parts per million in dry matter, that's when we can start to see issues. So if you've had to go out there and make a cutting of hay just after a hard frost or throughout a drought, I would certainly express getting that hay tested for that nitrate toxicity and that hydrogen or that prussic acid toxicity, just so you know if it's in there at detrimental levels or not. So that way when you go to feed it, you can offset it by lowering the ration of this hay that has the toxins in it to hay that doesn't. So just making sure it's only a couple of handfuls versus a whole bale at a time. And so this is what our Johnson grass looks like. Kind of normal size leaf blades, has little rhizomes at the base, can get up to 6 foot tall. So that's a good distinguishing characteristic. Many of our other grass forages don't get quite that tall. So if you have a grass that shoots up and then has kind of this panicle seed head at the top, kind of reminds me of Horton Hears a Who, some of those trees. So that's kind of what that seed head looks like at the top. And then it has a white mid vein going down the leaves. It's very prominent that you can see here in that lower picture. So that's going to be our Johnson grass. Next up is the Perilla mint. So this is again another one of those annuals that can cause issues, mostly in forest edges and along cool soils. Really, the flowering seed head and the seeds are the most toxic part of this mint. So we get the drooling, abnormal breathing, but we aren't quite sure how much needs to be consumed before symptoms and signs start to show. And so this is what that Perilla mint looks like. They can kind of be a purpley to green shade, but definitely have those serrated edges. You can kind of see that purplish shading on the underside especially. Has a minty smell to it. So if you're going along and you're weed whacking and all of a sudden you just get a smell of mint, you could have some perilla mint growing in your pastures and hayfields. And then one that we've heard quite a bit about the last few years is poison hemlock. So pastures, roadsides, no-till fields, fence rows, wood lines, all of those places are great places for poison hemlock to grow. Really, the young plants in the spring are our biggest areas of concern. Just again, because it's green, it's growing, it's young, it's succulent. Those animals, if they don't have enough forage to eat on the pasture, may just be going along and eating whatever green they can find. So that's when we have the issues. So we can have acute or chronic poisoning. So acute is just kind of short term, not too, lost my words. So acute, short term, not as long standing. So acute nervousness, seizures, drooling, slowed breathing, muscle tremors, depression, things like that. Chronic is if they continue to eat it for a longer period of time. If they've only been exposed to it once or twice, that's where we have the acute. But if you routinely turn those animals out or routinely harvest that field with a lot of this poison hemlock in it, and that animal has access to those toxins routinely, that's when we start to see some of these chronic issues. So that's where we can get birth defects, such as twisted limbs, scoliosis, twisted necks, cleft palate, and all of our livestock species can be affected by it. So these are two compounds that can cause issues, conine and conicine. And so really the signs depend on how much has been consumed. Like we said, there's acute and then there's chronic. So the signs can appear 30 minutes to 2 days after consumption. So if you just turn an animal out to the pasture for the first time in the spring and they start to show some of those signs within a half an hour or hour being out there, if for some reason they made a beeline to the poison hemlock and decided they like to eat it, we may be seeing that. But if it's been a couple of days, we could still see signs then. So we're looking at anywhere from 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of material being eaten in cattle. And so for those chronic issues, the cattle need to digest that plant between 40 to 70 days of gestation for birth defects to occur. So there's a very specific window of when our cattle and then our sheep as well ingest the poison hemlock for those chronic issues to occur of those birth defects. So 40 to 70 days for cattle, 30 to 60 days for our small ruminants. And so this is what our wild hemlock looks like. So low growing rosette for that first year. It's a biannual. So that first year, it's just that rosette. The second year is when it sends up the shoots and the flowers and the reproductive side of it. So first year, low growing. Second year can get 3 to 8 foot tall. Has those fern-like leaves. Again, reminds a lot of people of that wild carrot. But you can see here at the bottom, the wild carrot is a little bit thinner stem. The poison hemlock has those purple blotches on it. So that's a good identifying characteristic for it. And then we do have wild parsnip as well. It has an almost more triangulated stem. But those purple blotches are the biggest indicator of it being poison hemlock. Next up, we have pokeweed. So pokeweed's kind of an interesting one. It is a perennial found in a lot of different places. And so it's most toxic when those berries are present. Most of our livestock can be affected by it, except for poultry. And so the roots, shoots, and unripe berries are the most toxic part of those plants. You can see here, thirst, vomiting, diarrhea, impaired vision, drowsiness, respiratory paralysis is another sign. And so there are a couple of toxic compounds. So the saponins, are the primary toxic issue, and that's mostly in that berry juice. So those unripe green berries are one that's the biggest issue, but they're very bitter tasting. So for really us as humans, that's why we need to be cautious if we have young children around. If we as humans go to actually foraging ourselves in the woods, we want to stay away from pokeweed because it takes 10 berries to have serious toxic effects on us. 2 to 3 berries can be fatal in children. So we want to make sure we know how to identify this if we're going out and foraging ourselves for berries in the woods, because it can have major issues on us as humans as well. Ruminants are less susceptible, again, because of that rumen flora. So it takes a lot of consumption for this to be an issue. But because they're so bitter tasting, usually it doesn't become as big of an issue as some of our other plants. Wrong way. So this is our pokeweed. We have a seedlings kind of down below, have a reddish underside of the leaves. Has that identifying pink stem to it from top to bottom, and these little bit larger ovalish lanceolate leaves. So it's got the point on the end. And then those distinguishing berry chains. So again, the pink stem, and then the berries going all the way down it. And these can get up to 9 foot tall. So, all right, next plant is the redroot pigweed. So it's an annual, found in a lot of different places. Midsummer is when this is the biggest issue. All parts are toxic. So difficulty breathing and then sudden death as well. But again, gonna reiterate again, the only time these are really big concerns is if it's the only green material out there growing. So we're looking at redroot pigweed. Kind of the toxic component is kind of unknown at this point. They haven't really been able to target it, but they've been able to narrow it down to a nitrate toxicity. Again, basically less than 1% nitrate in that living tissue. So we need to consume anywhere from 0.04 to 2.9% of the green growth to have issues. And then that's oxalate poisoning or toxicity. So the oxalate is where it causes more of those breathing issues. So, and so really 0.1% of the body weight can be lethal in sheep and small ruminants if fed all at once. But the rumen flora can adapt over the course of 4 to 5 days, not 405 days, 4 to 5 days to handle it if they're slowly introduced to it. So it's kind of like in Princess Bride, building up that resistance to the toxins. So what our redroot pigweed looks like. So as a seedling, has that distinctive red stem to it, or red taproot, oval to kind of diamond-shaped leaves. And you can see the seed head here on this one. So Star of Bethlehem is our next one. It's a perennial, but primarily comes out in the spring. It's one of our first greening up plants. And so the biggest issue with this are the bulbs. So if an animal goes along, pulls that plant out of the ground and decides to eat the bulb portion instead of the leaves, or eats everything including the bulb, that's when we have some of these issues from Star of Bethlehem. Again, it's another cardiac glycoside, so cardiac issues with this one. So not really known how much needs to be consumed. But again, consider some of our other plants we've seen with this cardiac glycosides really didn't take a whole lot to be consumed before there are issues. So this is what the Star of Bethlehem looks like. So it looks almost like chives growing early in the spring. Gets this white 6-petaled flower on it. And so we can see there. So if they pull that up and eat everything, including the bulb, that's when we may have some issues. Wrong way.
Alicia, if you do need
Yes.
if you need a plot to collect Star of Bethlehem, I've got Charlie Creek Gardens in Wabash that has almost 100% stands. So just saying, if you need some, let me know.
I'll keep it in mind, Jeff. So, all right. So we've only got a couple more to cover here real quick. So the next one is tall fescue. So yes, tall fescue is one of those common plants that is planted as a grass for forages, but it does have toxic compounds in it. So we do need to be careful. So basically when they receive high rates of nitrogen, when there's been a frost, or if there's been a drought, prolonged drought, those are all issues. So we get fescue foot, lameness, fever, rapid breathing, reduced milk production, um, different types of things with the tall fescue. And that is because of what we call an endophytic or endophytic fungus. So it's found within the plant, and it's been one that we know has been an issue. And so basically when the plant was first developed, it was developed for certain things, and they didn't have this alkaloid toxic compound in mind. So basically it constricts the blood flow, and that's why we have some of these issues. So really depends on how high of a concentration of alkaloids we have in these plants. But since then, they found out that original tall fescue does have these endophytic issues. They've developed and bred for low endophyte or novel endophyte plant, because that endophyte actually helps keep that plant upright. So it is important to have it in there, but they've developed plants, tall fescue, that have more friendly compounds in it. So this is what our tall fescue looks like. We've got our bunch type grass, membranous ligule. Young seed heads are kind of spike-like, and these ridges along the leaf blades. So that's our tall fescue. And then our white clover. So again, we had Alsike clover at the beginning. White clover is different. So Alsike clover can have issues in both pasture as fresh and then in hay. White clover is primarily just a pasture issue. So again, a perennial. All the green plants, especially after a rain and dew, are on those plants when it's most moisture, I guess, heavy. So we can have bloat, drooling, aggression, and we need about 1 to 5% of the animal's body weight to be consumed alone by itself to have some of these issues. So this is what our white clover looks like. Again, it has kind of that white, almost pinkish bloom to it, but you can see here the watermarks on the leaves. So it has those white watermarks on it versus our Alsike clover did not have these watermarks on it. So those are good distinguishing characteristics between the two. Not all of the leaves will have it on it, but if you see a clump of clover growing together and you see quite a few of these leaves with white marks on it, it's probably white clover. All right, 2 plants left. We have white snakeroot. It's a perennial, really green plant, or if it's been dried down in hay, can have issues. So we'll see stiffness, depression, sweating, heart failure as well with white snakeroot. So compounds of concern, trematol, which is fat soluble. And then ketones are another big issue. So they need to eat 1 to 10% of their body weight over a period or in one feeding, depending on how concentrated these compounds are. Some we've heard 10 to 100 pounds. But the biggest issue we need to be aware of with white snakeroot is if we have lactating animals and we as humans are consuming this milk, it can be toxic to us as well, because these compounds can carry through the milk and into our own bodies, or into those young stock that may be eating milk still. So we find white snakeroot and we have lactating animals, we need to pull them off that pasture. And so this is what that white snakeroot looks like. It's got those serrated edges to the leaves, can grow up to 4 foot tall, white kind of, again, umbel shaped flowers. So we just need to be cautious of that. Then our last plant is the yew. It is a perennial, it is a shrub. It's one we all know and maybe not all love, but have at least probably in our yards. So really the older leaves, the seeds, and the berries are the most toxic. That can cause weakness, trembling, vomiting, and then death as well if there's too much of it consumed. Not really sure what exactly the compound is, but they're thinking an alkaloid. Again, cardiac issues with it. And so green foliage needs to be readily consumed. For monogastrics, so our horses, swine, poultry, we're looking at 0.1% of the animal's body weight. So it only takes a pound to have issues with a 1,000-pound horse. For smaller ruminants, so our sheep, goat, and cattle, we're looking at 0.5% of the animal's body weight. So about 5 pounds, because that rumen flora kind of takes a little bit more of the toxin out of it. But still, if you have neighbors that are just throwing their landscape clippings over the fence and the animals come over to investigate and eat, that's where we see the biggest issues. Do you love your use? Well, that's great. So I was actually watching a Hallmark movie one time. I know they don't always get ag scenes correct, but this one they actually had correct. Some neighbors had thrown ewes over the fence and had ended up killing some of their prize heifers. So I was like, yay, they got a fact correct, but they ended up remedying the problem once they alerted the neighbors what was going on. So again, this is what our yew looks like for those that are not aware. Gets those red berries on it that the birds love in the winter. And so in terms of being able to control these plants, really you need to be able to identify them. So that's why you need to kind of take a look at the toxic plants. So I'll put that link in the chat again. So scout, identify those weeds, see how many are in that pasture or hayfield, making sure you're managing well. So whether you're spraying if needed or going out there and just hand pulling a few weeds here or there, just making sure you try to get these out of the situation, especially if it's an overgrazed pasture. That's the biggest thing. Just want to keep reiterating is if these plants are the only green thing growing out there, the animals are going to eat it. But as long as you have proper management of your pastures, of your hayfields, there should be enough other biodiversity out there where they are not as highly concentrated. So just keep that in mind. So again, link is in the chat box. You can find it here. This is a project team that put that garden together. So greatly appreciate them all working on it. And with that, I see we have one question in the chat box. So can a cover crop drilled into a pasture help choke out or choke down Carolina horse nettle and black nightshade? Yeah, so I mean, as long as we can get out there, get that cover crop growing ahead of time, kind of break up that seed cycle a little bit, it can certainly help reduce some of those impacts. But again, those seeds can stay in the ground for a few years, so it may take a little bit of time to break up that cycle.
Well, thank you again for presenting today, Alicia. Great program. I was surprised at the list. A lot of those are in my yard. A lot of those are in my landscape. Yeah, I agree with the statement about the Hallmark movie where, oh, they got it right. It's kind of morbid, but they
Yeah.
got it right. So,
Yeah.
we can stick around for a few more minutes. It is 1:04, but just want to say thank you, Alicia. And I did put the post-program survey in the chat box. If you guys don't mind clicking on that and giving your responses, that helps us out. Otherwise, everyone have a great rest of your day.